Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Welcome to our Hub Foundation Scholarship Banquet on the theme One Ummah, Embracing Sunnis, Shi'ah, and Sufis. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that many of us recently celebrated the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad, blessings and peace upon him. For Muslims, he's the embodiment of mercy and compassion, whose heart embraces all of us, regardless of our outward differences. We also recognize and celebrate the birth of Jesus, peace be upon him, in the month ahead, who is also a symbol of mercy, love, and acceptance. Special thanks to our guests this evening, Baraka Blue, Jihad Turk, and Dr. Hamid Mavani for joining us. Later this evening, we'll be honoring this year's prestigious Hub Foundation Scholarship recipients. I'd like to first thank and congratulate each of them for joining us, including Sara Aziz, Izzet Choban, Imran Ghani, Adiba Hassan, Logan Seiler, Samuel Bendek Sotios, and Sylvia Turini, who unfortunately could not be with us this evening because she's doing field research in Palestine. But we'll hear from her via video recording. Please join me in congratulating our scholarship recipients. I would also like to thank everyone at Hub Foundation and Hub 925 who made this event possible, especially our founder and benefactor, Sam Hirbaud. This year, each scholarship recipient received $20,000. We invite each of you as well to join us with matching funds so that next year we can provide as many as 14 scholarships, God willing. I'd like to recognize some of the other folks that are here tonight, really, who are embodying this vision of one ummah, one community. We have from Zaytuna College, one of our teachers, Imam Zaid Shakir, also Dr. Abdullah Ali, Catherine Hamza, also from Zaytuna. We have Dr. Peyman Amiri from ICCNC. We have Dr. Ijaz Naqvi from Sabah. We also have our eminent speakers from Bayan Claremont, Jihad Turk and Dr. Hamid Mavani. And all of you are guests from different perspectives coming together to celebrate the oneness of humanity. I'd like to say a few words about this subject, one ummah, embracing Sunnis, Shia, and Sufis, before I introduce our speakers. It seems to me that the unity of God is expressed here on earth by the diversity and harmony of creation. The prophets accepted all people of goodwill and even showed mercy and tolerance towards their enemies. The Prophet Muhammad loved his family, peace and blessings be upon him, dearly, and embraced his companions from all walks of life, men, women, and children, blacks and whites, the rich and poor. Those who truly represent him are also merciful and accepting of differences. Islam is not monolithic, and anyone who seeks to impose uniformity is bound to fail. It's also said that Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik both studied with Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, who's considered the 6th Shi'i Imam and one of the poles of the Sufi orders. They revered him as the most knowledgeable scholar of their time. All of the Sufi orders actually trace back to the Prophet Muhammad through his family. Peace and blessings be upon him. And in some cases, through as many as the first 8 imams. There are saints and scholars in both branches of Islam, and it's sort of, they witness for us and are testaments that, you know, we can learn from both schools. It's unlikely that any of us will have the same knowledge as an Ibn Arabi, the Andalusian Sunni Sufi scholar who reached such heights of mystical vision and wrote these inspired treatises, or of the Safavid Shi'i philosopher Mullah Sadra. So it suggests that we can reach out across the aisle and not only tolerate one another, but really expand our knowledge. Some steps were made recently. In 1958, Sheikh Mahmoud Shaltut of Al-Azhar issued a fatwa, a legal opinion, recognizing the validity of the Jafri school of jurisprudence. In 2004, the Amman message was signed by leading Sunni and Shi'i scholars around the world, recognizing each other as Muslims. But can we go beyond tolerance? Can our mosques, academic institutions, and community centers embrace one another? Can we forge a new bond of fellowship in North America, wherein we welcome and learn from one another? I'm pleased to introduce two eminent guests who are modeling Muslim interfaith education. First, we have Jihad Turk, the founding president of Bayan Claremont, the nation's first Muslim graduate school to offer accredited master's degrees in the fields of Islamic studies, education, chaplaincy, and leadership. Jihad previously served as the imam at the Islamic Center of Southern California. He's a sought-after national speaker on issues related to Islam, Muslims in America, Muslim reform movements, ethical leadership, and spirituality and identity formation of youth. Additionally, Jihad has committed himself to building bridges across faith communities to address the issues of homelessness and poverty. He spent time at both the Islamic University of Medina, where he studied Arabic and Islamic studies, and in Iran, where he studied Persian at the University of Tehran and in Qom. He completed his BA in History and Arabic at the University of California, Berkeley, his master's degree in Islamic law and jurisprudence at the University of Texas, Austin, and is currently pursuing his PhD in Islamic studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, where he has also taught as an adjunct faculty for many years. Please join me in welcoming Jihad Turk.
Assalamu alaikum. So I have about 20 minutes with you, and the way I want to use this time, and I've coordinated a little bit with my colleague, Dr. Mavani, I want to do three things. The first thing I want to do is say some overly generalized comments about the Sunni Shia trajectory, how they formed, and the different theologies that arose from those two different groups. Then I want to spend a good bit of time talking about the geopolitical context in which there is violent engagement between these two communities internationally today. And then leave you with a little bit of hope for what the future might hold for us in terms of Sunni-Shia relations. To begin with, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I became interested in this topic. As a teenager, growing up with a Christian American mother and a Muslim Palestinian father as a kid in Arizona, it gave me a little bit of permission, if you will, to explore both Christianity and Islam as I was coming of age. And when I was intrigued and learned more about Islam, I decided that I wanted to learn Arabic. And even though my father is Palestinian, they call it mother tongue for a reason. I only grew up speaking English. I had the great good fortune to receive a scholarship to study at the Islamic University of Medina. So after my freshman year of college, I withdrew from my studies here in the United States, and I went to study abroad in Medina. And I studied there for a couple of years. I learned the Arabic language, and I was able to connect to the Quran and to the sources of Islamic jurisprudence and theology. And I fell in love. And I happened to have been accepted into that scholarship program 2 weeks after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in the run-up to the first Gulf War. So while I'm there studying and finding inner peace in Medina, the Prophet's city, may God have mercy on him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, around me is warfare. Literally, people, they closed the airports. In the middle of my first year there, bombs were falling. People were getting killed, and it was a time of turmoil in the world. And so here I was in my spiritual walkabout in the deserts of Arabia, and I asked myself, what is it that I want to do with my life now that I found this beautiful thing? And it was there I decided to come back and leave my engineering undergraduate major and go into the humanities. Even though I loved engineering and math like any good American Muslim kid, I decided to go into the field of Islamic studies because I saw that we had a lot of Muslim engineers around, but when I wanted to take a course in the university, at least this is in 1989, on Islam, there weren't really very many good options. And so I said, we need more Muslim academics to be able to provide those elective options for the medical students, Muslim medical students and engineering students. We have some here at this table over here, obviously. And so I transferred to Berkeley, and I was pursuing my degree there, and I said, I need to, at the same time, in preparation for my graduate work, learn another Middle Eastern language. And I, investigated what would be the second most important language, and of course Persian historically has been a significant language for Islamic studies and contribution to Islamic philosophy and poetry and so many fields. And so I said, instead of studying it in a stuffy classroom, let me withdraw for another year and go and study in an immersion program in Iran. And I thought also this would be helpful to me because when I was in Medina, all I heard were the worst things about Shi'as. And we hear these agreements that have been signed in which there's recognition by Sunnis and by Shi'as that each belong to the Muslim faith, as if this is something revolutionary. It shouldn't be. So I wanted to challenge myself to hear directly from scholars within the Shia tradition about what it is that Shia Islam was about, and where better to do that than not only in the University of Tehran but in Qom. So I had the opportunity, and I did that. I was studying with Professor Hamid Algar at that time, and so he had written some letters of introduction for me there, and so I was well received and had at my disposal some incredible scholars and learned Persian, which is a beautiful language. And then continued on my studies, as you heard in my introduction. Now, when I was doing my graduate work at UCLA, the opportunity came to create a graduate school. And I want to conclude, I want to pick up here at the conclusion and pick up this story where I left off. But I want to interject here a little bit about what it is that I was studying while I was in my graduate school. I was focused on Islamic law as part of my Islamic Studies PhD program. And I took probably 3 times as many courses as I needed to for my degree, in part because really what I was investigating along with my academic studies was the question, what is going on in the world? Why is Islam in such turmoil internationally? This religion which fills my heart with peace and tranquility and is inspirational to me and to so many throughout history. Why is it in the middle of all of this bloodshed and turmoil, not just between Sunnis and Shi'as, but in the world at large? And so I took a lot of courses in history and political science and in regional studies, etc. And I think I came to something that gives me clarity as to what's really going on in the world. And that's what I want to talk about in just one moment. So those are my next 2 topics that I introduced. But to say some overly general things about the Sunni Shia trajectory and how they came to be, I was talking to one young lady here earlier tonight, and she was asking me, so what is the reason that Sunnis and Shias came to be? She was unfamiliar. She was a practicing, committed, dedicated Muslim, but really had no clarity as to how it is that there became this deep division within Islamic theology. So what I'll say is, and putting on a sort of an academic hat, and maybe challenging, and will be challenged by my colleague who will come after me, what I'll suggest is that, and Allahu A'lam, that we had a beautiful message that was revealed to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his message was timeless, and it's something that humanity throughout the rest of history will aspire to realize, the perfection of the human character and the human soul and the human spirit in our attempt to approach the divine. This is universal and endless and timeless. But one of the things that the Quran did not do, in part because maybe as a people, as a society, as a species, we weren't quite ready for it, one of the things that I would argue that Islam and the Quran did not do was to detail and specify exactly how we are as a species to organize ourselves in the fine details of how it is that we organize ourselves. And so after his passing, we have the stories that we all know about, where Omar is shaken to the point where he's having difficult time wrapping his mind around it, right? And the Muslims kind of scramble to figure out what to do next. And the first four caliphs, there's a different mechanism by which each one is selected to be the leader. So there wasn't an organized, in-place trajectory for political organization and governance. And what you found is, and it's very troubling, and when I had this conversation earlier tonight, I was talking about how, as a community, we're so uncomfortable talking about how some of these companions who we each have such high esteem for individually, they ended up fighting, literally, physically, committing bloodshed, killing one another. We call it the fitna, the early conflicts, civil wars within the Muslim community, where you have Aisha, Talha, Zubair, Ali, all in conflict, and of course Muawiyah and Ali, etc. So there was conflict over who is to rule, who was the legitimate successor to inherit not just the rule of the community in a worldly sense, but also who has the moral authority to guide this ummah, this nascent spiritual community. And so these things not having been worked out were things that the communities grappled with, the early companions grappled with, and there were different factions and whatnot. So I would argue, again, in a general, overly generalized sense, that there were personalities, that there were individuals, some of whom might have been more credible in terms of their spiritual authority, others might have been more effective in terms of their political abilities and their organizational skills, in conflict over who should lead the communities. And those individuals and their followers and their supporters ended up in conflict, and over generations, I would say, those political differences became justified through theological arguments. So again, in general terms, the word, for example, Shi'ah is short for Shi'atu Ali. They are the political supporters or partisans who supported Ali in his conflicts. I don't know any Sunnis who wouldn't identify themselves as Shi'atu Ali in that sense, who were supporting Ali during his struggles. But having the theology that supports not just him as a political figure who should be supported, but the theology that says that he was selected by God and mandated by God and therefore is the only righteous leader that should be acknowledged because of that appointment through this lineage, that's where there's a divergence in theology. That being said, we might not ever agree. I wasn't there in these conflicts. I don't have to necessarily choose a side in terms of these details because we can't really know all of the details of history. But that we accept each other as Muslim, I think, is a good starting point. And that we are able to, people think we have these incredible differences. We have these deep divides. Bayan Claremont, as an Islamic graduate school, is embedded within a Christian seminary and in partnership with a Jewish seminary and other world religious traditions. The differences between Christian groups, between, let's say, Catholics and Pentecostals, that's a real difference. That's a huge difference. The difference between Sunnis and Shias is so insignificant in terms of practice, and in many cases, depending on where you fall in the Sunni theology and where you fall in the Shia theology, the difference is, you could argue in some cases, particularly in law, you might find greater commonality, again on law, not theology, between the Hanafis and the Shafis than you would find between the Hanafis and the Hanbalis. So, I mean, one of the things that we did, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, when we had our first orientation at Bayan Claremont, we have mostly Sunni faculty and mostly Sunni students because we reflect the demographics of our community. But we had some Shia students and some Shia faculty, and we had a roundtable discussion over lunch and introducing each other. It came time for the Dhuhr prayer. So we prayed Dhuhr together in Jama'ah, and the Shia student, at that time there was only one, and he was an imam, by the way, Imam Hadi Qazwini, he joined us in prayer, and he prayed alongside with everybody else. There were some students there from other countries who had never met a Shi'a before, at least not knowingly. And here they were praying literally shoulder to shoulder with this brother. And then after the prayer, I turned and I said, Hadi. He said, yeah. I said, you're a Shi'i. And everyone looked at him in surprise. And he said, yeah. And I said, you prayed with us? He said, I did. So at that point, there was a little bit of tension in the room. And I said, would you mind explaining to us what you say in prayer, step by step, so that we demystify what it is that we imagine is happening? So he broke it down and explained step by step, and all the Sunnis in the room said, well, he meets all of the basic requirements for a valid prayer. And there are some little differences here and there, but in essence, it's the same. So people there felt comfortable when it was time, to even select him to lead the prayer, they would follow behind. So it's not just accepting each other as Muslim, but accepting the validity of the prayer and to follow behind them in prayer as a symbolic gesture of really embracing them and not just nominally embracing them within the fold of Islam. And that was an important cultural bridge, because we have this imagination oftentimes, depending on what side of the polemical debate we're on, about who the other is and what it is that they're about. So I got a little bit ahead of myself. I want to pull back. And in the next few minutes, I really want to share with you the research that I did that, to me, really explained what's going on in terms of the conflict. Because even if you have a disagreement as to whether you put your hands here or here, how does that turn into bloodshed? How does that turn into violence? How does that become a justification for killing somebody? So when I was trying to wrap my mind around all of these issues relating to Islam and violence, or Muslim communities involved in warfare, etc., around the world, Bernard Lewis from Princeton calls it Islam's bloody borders in his book, What Went Wrong with Islam. What became apparent to me over the years was that even as a person who's a religious leader, an imam, someone who's studied, who's focused on Islamic studies and takes religion seriously, or try to, I was struck by this notion, or what I found in the research, that most people are motivated by things other than their faith, and that those things inform their behavior. Let me phrase that in a different way. Most people are motivated by economics, by culture, by family, by so many other factors than religion, and religion is just one small influence in people's lives. And if you look to all of the conflicts around the world, it's not that Islam happens to be, or Muslims happen to be in conflict with everybody, but if you look at all of the places in which there is significant political violence, you can find a unifying lens by which you can understand all of that, that it doesn't put Islam as the reason. It doesn't put Muslims as somehow an exception to the rule of civilized humanity, but rather puts human beings as agents and actors in the world, consistent across whatever religion or culture or political context, acting in the same way as human beings, and that means acting fallibly and with oftentimes a very base instinct. Foucault, who's a modern continental scholar, suggests that modern nationalism, modern nationalist identity, which is how the world is divided up. We used to be a world of empires that were multilinguistic, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and covered vast territories. That's how the world used to be divided up. You had the Ottoman Empire, lasted over 500 years. You had great empires in Asia. You had also the British Empire as well. The world used to be organized by these empires, but there began, starting over the last 400 or 500 years, this process of transition from empire to nation state. And nation states coalesce around a narrative or a story of who we are as a people. And every nationalist or ultra-nationalist ideology, as Foucault would suggest, focuses around 5 essential characteristics or qualities. One of them is religion, but the others are, and oftentimes more powerful, language, culture, history, and a particular piece of land. Let me say that again. Religion is one part, language, culture, history, and land. So let's take a few high-profile examples of political violence around the world, looking at it through conflicts of nationalist identities that have led to tremendous bloodshed, before we then take that lens and apply it to the Muslim world in general and Sunni-Shia relations in particular. So bear with me a little bit. Let's start with Northern Ireland. Now, in Northern Ireland, you have, of course, they're all Irish, right? Or they're all Northern Irish. They have the same language, culture, history, and piece of land. Where's the dividing line? Half of the population is Protestant, and the other half are Catholic. So you have the Protestants and the Catholic as the dividing line. They also have a history of the British Empire there, which are Protestant, promoting one aspect of that. So there's that heritage there that led to a militarization, a support, both financially and militarily, of one side over the other, and the other side feeling maybe that they didn't have the option to win their independence through a direct conflict, turned to terrorism. They used terrorism, asymmetrical warfare, as a way, as a tactic to try and secure the control of the state, which is this territory that they are assigned as part of this nation state. They wanted control of the apparatus of the state, and because they, as their sort of modern nationalist tribal identity, I'm going to call it national tribalism, or sometimes religious tribalism in this case, they wanted to control the apparatus of the state, because with that comes control of the narrative and the identity of the population. And so this resulted in decades-long conflict between these two people within the nation state. Now, the question always comes, well, who drew the map? Who put that as the border? And that's part of the problem. Because if you look at, let's say, Rwanda, over 1 million people died. Over 1 million people died in that conflict. Who were the people who were at odds with one another? There were two different, literally, tribes. You had the Hutus and the Tutsis. Now, the Hutus made up 89% of the population, and the Tutsis 11%. Now, the Tutsis happen to have been supported by the former colonial power, and the Belgians maybe preferred them, gave them greater opportunities to succeed and be in greater control of the state that was bigger than the proportion of their demographics within that state, and it led to some hostilities within. And there was other neighboring states and other factors that complicated it, but nonetheless, when it erupted, 1 million people died, and it was neighbors that were killing neighbors. Let's take another example, the Basques in northern Spain. Now, the Basques, one thing I'll say about Rwanda is, here you could say, oh, well, they were all black Africans, they all looked like they were the same to us. They saw themselves as two different peoples, that they had a border with one state, Rwanda, again, drawn up by the Europeans, but they were forced into that territory, and they were vying for control of that state. And those dividing lines might not have been religion, and maybe not even language, although there were some linguistic differences, but it was those other aspects of one's culture and one's history and one's attachment to the land. Another example is the Basques in northern Spain. Now, the Basques in northern Spain is probably not as high profile as the other ones, but for decades, those who lived in the Pyrenees Mountains in the northern part of the Iberian Peninsula wanted to break off and form their own nation state. They were included in the boundaries or the territory of Spain. Now here, they were all Catholic. The Basques were Catholic, and the Spaniards were Catholic. But for decades, they waged an asymmetrical or terroristic campaign of violence to try and win their independence. They would blow up cafes and train stations, different things, to try and dissuade the Spaniards from maintaining control of their territory. Where did they differ? They had their own language, their own culture, their own history, and their own piece of territory. So here the religion wasn't the dividing line as it was in Northern Ireland. And it wasn't their culture and other things as it was in, or the tribal identity as it was in Rwanda. But it was the language, history, and their own territory that divided them. Let's take another example, and then we'll get to the Muslim world. Take the example, and it's a very painful example, of the Rohingya in Myanmar, in Burma. So when the first round of genocide was taking place, the State Department sent a delegation from the Rakhine state to Bayan of Buddhist monks and of Muslim leaders from that region. And they came to us to discuss how Buddhists and Muslims can get along. And I said, before we engage in that conversation, I want some answers. Buddhism, we think of it as in the United States as the most peaceful religion in the world. You know, if you survey people, what's the most peaceful? Oh, it's Buddhists. They're Buddhists. Okay, I said, all right. Why are you in conflict with the Muslims? What's going on here? And the Buddhist monk, who was not one of the extremists, obviously, who was promoting the genocide against the Rohingya Muslim population, which is 2% of the population, no threat to the majority. He said, look, we used to be a military dictatorship. This is the monk speaking. We used to be a military dictatorship. We recently became a democracy. And as a democracy, we needed to, the government, the military in particular, wanted to maintain control of the state. And in order to do that, they felt that they needed to rally the population to develop a nationalist or ultra-nationalist narrative that included Buddhism as part of their identity, and to identify an enemy to the community that would unite everybody. And so they chose to go after the Rohingya Muslims. So that here they're using an ultra-nationalist narrative that co-opts Buddhism, the world's quote-unquote most peaceful religion in the world, to, from the pulpit, from the temples, go out and inspire the populations to go and commit acts of genocide, of the most gruesome kind. So, bringing it back now to the internal conflicts. If you watch media and you're not a Muslim, you hear the case of Iraq. And in the case of Iraq, you hear that there is a conflict between three groups there. You have the Sunnis, and you have the Shi'is, and you have the Kurds. And if you ask your general population here in the United States, the Shi'is are Shi'i. The Sunnis are Sunni. What religion are the Kurds? And people pause like a deer in the headlights, and they just look around bewildered. Some will say Yazidis. Some will say Christian. No one ever says, well, they're Muslim, and they're Sunni Muslim at that. Because the media, the news, doesn't know how the way they frame things is very lazy, and they like sound bites. And for them, what's going on is you have Shi'is and Sunnis killing each other. They didn't know what to do with the Kurds, because they would have the Sunnis and the Shiites, and who's fighting the Sunnis and the Sunnis. It doesn't make any sense. So they just said, okay, well, let's just carve out for them this ethnic identity. But what's really going on is you had three different communities that, were different provinces under the Ottoman Empire. And when the British took it over, they combined them into one state of Iraq. And then, of course, for many years it was ruled by a brutal dictatorship that was part of the 20% minority community of the Arab Sunnis, Saddam Hussein. And he ruled things with an iron fist, and he manipulated the population in such a way to maintain his control. But when it became a quote-unquote democracy, well, then there was a shift to this notion of who are we as a people? Well, 60% are of Shiite background, and that became a rallying cry for this nationalist identity. We are Iraqi, but our political alliance are with people who are part of our tribe. Now, it has nothing to do with the principles or the dictates or the theology of Shi'ism. It was more of a political, tribal, religio-tribal, ethnic almost, ultra-nationalist narrative within Iraq that pitted parts of the population against the other. And you can understand why there might have been some animosity towards the Arab minority, because they were supportive of Saddam Hussein, who ruled them with great brutality. Nonetheless, modern nationalism isn't whatsoever about the theology. It's taking a symbol, it's a symbolization of religion, and weaving that into a narrative of the story of who we are as a people, who the in-group is versus the out-group, so that we can harness the power of that group and wield it against those who, to increase our power and to diminish the power of others. And politicians, including the current one that we have here in high office, utilizes that same kind of ultra-nationalist rhetoric in a way that, as many commentators would point out, is against the self-interest of those people, but they buy into this narrative and this story about who they are. When I was introduced by a Catholic archbishop in Southern California to speak to his congregation about Islam and Muslims, he said, you might have some questions later on, and this was in the days shortly after 9/11, about Islam and terrorism, but let me just say as a preface, those Catholics in Northern Ireland who, under the guise of NRA, were committing acts of terrorism, I can tell you as a Catholic archbishop, we're not manifesting the principles of our tradition. So I don't want you to, as a Catholic audience, assume something about Islam based on the actions of some people who might have political motivations. In conclusion, or in summary, there are some real differences in theology that I would argue are born out of historical, political differences that became rigidified and solidified into theological positions. Those differences, nonetheless, are quite minor if you look at the details of them. They're being exploited by political context and political actors today to gain power, to wield power, and to motivate a following to move in a certain direction within the boundaries of certain political or nation states, or sometimes between nation states, as you would find, for example, is the case between Saudi Arabia and Iran in today's world. And lastly, and I'll just say this, if we take our religion seriously, and it's not just a symbol of who we are as a people, but if we take the dictates and the teachings of our faith seriously and are motivated to try and emulate the beloved character of our prophet, the character of our beloved prophet, rather, and the teachings of the Quran, then we will be informed by our religion to rise above these petty differences and not to buy into this divisive rhetoric. And so one of the things that we're trying to do at Bayan Claremont is to create a safe space in which we don't try and gloss over the differences, but we can come to really know and understand each other for how it is that we connect to God through this rich and diverse tradition that we call Islam, whether that's Sunni, Shi'i, or Sufi, or other. And some of the students might say I'm Sushi because they have one parent who's Sunni and one who's Shi'i. So we're trying to create a safe space, and Professor Mavani is actually teaching a course, I think the second time he's teaching at Bayan, on Sunni-Shia relations next semester. And we've had this course offered, I think, 4 or 5 times already over the last number of years at Bayan. And we have in that class people of Iranian background and people of Syrian background. And these are tough conversations. And they are serious conversations and real conversations. But when they come out of that classroom and they engage in that real conversation, they hug each other and then they pray side by side. So there's some real hope, I have at least, in the possibility of how it is that we can still relate to each other as human beings and have difficult conversations, but not demonize and vilify and reduce the other in our own estimation to the point where we justify committing acts of violence against one another as human beings. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'll just say one quick thing. I'm very inspired by the work of Hub 925, and I was very honored to accept this invitation, really to be part of this this cultural imagination of how Muslims can not only gather together and listen and grow and be inspired by one another as we were at the opening of this program, but how we can also engage the society at large. And I think the gym here is one example of that, and some of the other programs that might invite a broader audience into this room, in this very impressive room, is another example of that. And I think this is just the beginning of something very beautiful. The scholarships is another way. And you know, these having been a graduate student for many years, a $20,000 scholarship is a very significant scholarship. I remember the Islamic Scholarship Fund, when they were starting, they would offer like $2,000, $3,000. When we went with the Islamic Scholarship Fund, we were offering $5,000 scholarships. A $20,000 scholarship is a very big deal, and it really can make the attaining of higher education, a degree in higher education, a PhD, and a master's degree in some context, accessible. And I can tell you that this will pay dividends, because the recipient of those scholarships, the recipients, I should say, of those scholarships will forever feel indebted to the community that supported them in their higher education, and will give back and give back and give back. So I encourage you to match these scholarships and increase the number next year, so we can offer 14 scholarships and not just 7. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Jihad. And I think he really exemplifies, you know, for those of us who haven't, how we can reach across the aisle and learn from someone who is Sunni if we're Shi'i, or Shi'i if we're Sunni. Or as the Prophet said, seek knowledge even unto China, peace and blessings be upon him. That is, we can really learn from all people. And I especially appreciate how you deconstructed the myth that, you know, religion is the sole cause to this division. And I think it's really coming from outside forces who are trying to divide folks, not only in the, you know, Muslim majority countries, but, you know, as you said, the Ireland and other places. Thank you, Jihad. I'd now like to introduce another scholar who I'm a huge fan of, and who I think always speaks from the heart with a great deal of knowledge about Islam, about justice. Dr. Hamid Mavani is Associate Professor of Islamic Studies at Bayonne-Claremont in California. His expertise in Islamic studies stems from academic training at universities and specialized theological training at traditional seminaries in the Muslim world. His primary fields of interest include Islamic legal theory, women and Shi'i law, Islamic theology and political thought, Islam and secularity, intra-Muslim discourse, and environmental ethics. Dr. Mavani is the author of numerous books and articles, including Religious Authority and Political Thought in Twelver Shi'ism. His scholarship also includes translations of Islamic texts from Arabic and Persian into English. Dr. Mavani also serves on the Hub Foundation Scholarship Advisory Board. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hamid Mavani.
Don't fall asleep. I know you've had a very delicious meal and a very passionate delivery by Jihad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, I would like to thank Zach and Agha Saman for extending to me this very gracious invitation to be part of this very important program. Thanks to all of you for being present here and being patient, sabr, to be able to listen to this monologue and survive after this very, very delicious korma sabzi. And also I would like to thank Zach for choosing a very important topic and one that is relevant and vital. And I say this very seriously, that the danger of Sunni Shia sectarianism is very real. It is not something imagined. It is taking deep roots in various parts of the Muslim world, and the tentacles are spreading to an extent that we are finding the impact of this intolerance, whatever the cause may be, percolating even in the West. And therefore it is a very important topic, and to discuss it as a complex phenomena. What do I mean to say? We should not be simplistic and simplify the Sunni Shia tension in very simplistic terms. It is far more multidimensional, as was presented by Jihad. There are various components. There's a theological component, there's a historical narrative that is different, there's a worldview that could be different, there are geopolitical influences, there are vested interests, there are people who are exploiting and manipulating these tensions for their own ulterior motives. But there are also very serious theological issues that Sunnis and Shias have to get together and deal with in a civil way, with mutual respect for each other's differences, without vilifying each other, without demonizing each other, without dehumanizing each other. Differences are part and parcel of being a human being. We don't need to negate this phenomena of differences or diversity, but to appreciate the humanness and the sincerity of the other party without passing judgments. Because you are Shia or you are Sunni, you don't have any extra right to claim any kind of spiritual superiority, spiritual arrogance. I'm better than you. But we need to discuss the issues and not talk in slogans. For example, we say, Sunnis and Shias, we are all the same. What is all this nonsense about sectarianism and all this tension and conflict? We have the major tenets of faith are the same. We believe in Tawheed, monotheism. We believe in prophethood, Nubuwwah. We believe in the day of resurrection. We believe in similar rituals, prayers and fasting and pilgrimage. We face the same Qibla towards Mecca. We believe that the Quran is the word of God. It's a verbatim speech of God, and it's a miracle that was sent through the agency of Gabriel and through Prophet Muhammad. Both of us follow the prophetic sunnah. Both of us revere Ali ibn Abi Talib. Both of us respect Ahlul Bayt. So then what is the cause of all this kind of acute hostility and animosity? But this is at the surface level. It is very superficial. It's very simplistic to argue that we overlap in so many different areas of dogma and doctrines and creed that there is no need for us to talk about some of the sensitive issues on which we disagree. That doesn't show frankness. That doesn't show that we have a strong bond. A strong bond means, between brother and sister, means I can discuss with you the most sensitive issues and you will still respect me, and vice versa. This is the strength of brotherhood and fraternity and sisterhood. Not that we simplify issues as, oh, we are all together, we believe in the same. There are also some serious issues. The reason why many of these vested interests are able to exploit and manipulate this kind of sectarian tension, in my view, is because our brotherhood and sisterhood is very shallow. We haven't really laid down a foundation to try to come to grips with some of the historical differences, historical sacred narratives, theological issues. We haven't dealt with it. And because we haven't dealt with it, those who are seeking their own vested interests, they are able to exploit and manipulate these sectarian differences for their own political benefits. And I'll give you some examples how we are dealing with in modernity. There is an explosion of sectarian conflicts with such force in the Muslim world. It should not be underestimated. In Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, in Pakistan, in Malaysia, and beyond. Why? Is it because we have to resign ourselves and say, well, we are doomed? You know, this is a millennial dispute that happened at the time of the prophet's death, and therefore we are now just doomed to accept these differences as part and parcel of the inherent tradition and legacy of the prophet. Well, this is not true. Is it because of historical theological differences? Or are there geopolitical reasons, as was specified, where players on both political and religious domains deliberately manipulate the discourse in order to create tensions between Sunnis and the Shi'is to promote their own interests? And those of the tyrants. Remember, Muslim world is ruled by despots, by those who are dictators and autocrats. Well, they have to find a mechanism to be able to gain the support of the public, right? They can talk about the Palestinian oppression. They can talk about we are there to safeguard your vested interest, sectarian identity. These Shias will take over, or vice versa. And this becomes a tool to appease and pacify the public so they will not talk about corruption, mismanagement of the economy, and all the other negative things in education, in media, and so on. It preoccupies the mind of the public to think about these kinds of issues of sectarian identity. In the Shia tradition, the foundation of increasing the prospect of Sunni Shia harmony was laid by Sheikh Mufid in the 11th century with the introduction of reason, of aql, and reason and rationality as an integral part of faith. Before that, Shiism was also very dogmatic. Shiism was also very myopic. Until the time of Sheikh Mufid, we see that openness to be able to be inclusive of other diverse opinions. This allowed for rational arguments in jurisprudence and theology and for critically reading past history. We need to read history critically. We cannot assume history the way it was given to us, or we cannot fabricate history and revise history because it suits our own sectarian assumptions. You know, as a Shia, I have my own assumptions. As a Sunni, you have your own assumptions. What we are doing is we are revising history, and we don't ask ourselves, why did the historian write that particular monograph at that particular time of history? He had a motivation. There was a reason why the historian was writing that history, and we need to figure out what kind of a bias did he have. Did he dedicate this book to this particular caliph or that particular caliph? What was the agenda? We need to read history or historiography very critically and very thoroughly. You can't revise history. Revisionism is present in both Sunni historiography and Shia historiography rampant, where they are rereading history and revising history the way it never occurred. Sheikh Mufid lays down the foundation of this critical thinking. It is followed further by Sharif Murtaza and Sheikh Tusi. In their methodology, they relied upon Sunni law, both of them, Tusi and Sharif al-Murtaza. Especially they relied upon Shafi'i jurisprudence. Now this may come as a shock for a Shia. We think that we have everything, right? We haven't taken anything from Sunni jurisprudence or Sunni theology or nothing, right? We are self-sufficient. Well, it's quite different. As a matter of fact, one of the works on comparative Sunni Shia work on jurisprudence was written by Sheikh Tusi. It's called Al-Khilaf, a wonderful work where you see a scholar discussing issues intelligently and scholarly in a comparative work taking the viewpoints of both Sunni and Shia schools of thought. You know, Ayatollah Burujerdi in Iran used to argue that if you want to understand Shia jurisprudence and Shia legal theory, you have to master and become proficient in Sunni legal theory. because there was a close interrelationship between the two. Remember that Sunni usul al-fiqh began much earlier than Shia usul al-fiqh, because the Shi'is argued that we have the infallible Imam, and until the infallible Imam is accessible, well, we have certainty. There is no need to go to probabilities. Because once you start to open up usul al-fiqh, you are dealing in the realm of probabilities, not yaqeen. And once you have yaqeen, there is no need for probabilities. So Sunni usul al-fiqh began much earlier than Shia usul al-fiqh, and Shia usul al-fiqh benefited from Sunni usul al-fiqh, and then the Sunni jurisprudence very much relied also upon the Shia usul al-fiqh for further enhancement. So there was this kind of collegiality and what I would call cross-cultural sectarian collaboration. But this did not last for too long. The rapprochement did not last once the Safavid took power in Iran in 1501, who were competing with the Sunni Ottoman for identity. They wanted to have a separate sectarian identity different from the Ottoman Turks. So they devised a sectarian identity of Shiism, and they proclaimed Shiism as the official religion of the state. They deliberately magnified the differences between Sunnis and Shia and popularized the public vilification and cursing of the three caliphs. Muhammad Baqir Majlisi, who is the author of this magnum opus Biharul Anwar, you will find in his work, because he lived in this era of the Safavid and Qajar, during these sectarian tensions, you will find that some of the collection that he has are very problematic. They demonize different companions of the Holy Prophet. They demonize and vilify the wives of the Holy Prophet, completely unethical, un-Quranic. But he got tied up in this vortex, in this volcano of Sunni Shia sectarianism that was exploited by the Safavid and also the Qajar dynasty. Again, you have to be careful. If your Sunni Shia reconciliation is shallow, they can play with it. They can play on you. They can play on us, right? And we become a pawn, a tool in their hands, because we have not dealt with the real issues that are really impactful and they impact the public. And I'll say a couple of them towards the end. Who was keeping time? "10 minutes. Oh, you are so generous. Oh, okay. I like him. I knew I like him. Look at the couple of examples. The geopolitical rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran has been exploited through sectarian identities in their foreign policy. You don't think so? It is so clear. Ever since the revolution of Iran's success in 1979, Saudi Arabia felt threatened by these proclamations of exporting the revolution and the ideology of revolution, so they decided to start a reaction to propagate the ideology of Wahhabism, which is a very exclusivistic, very toxic, very poisonous, anti-reason, dogmatic ideology of intolerance. And this has spread far and wide. But it was a geopolitical rivalry to see who will have the greater influence in the region. It's a regional war cloaked in sectarianism. But my question is, why are they able to exploit this? You know, if our claim is that we should not have this kind of tension, then why are they able to exploit and play on our simplicity? They have their own proxies who are fighting their wars on their behalf, and they are the ones directing the conflict. And perhaps the conflict is more inflammatory and more expansive, partly because religion also has a great part in this conflict. Religion makes things far more toxic than they would be if in the absence of religion. They make it more inflammatory. Look at Bahrain and Lebanon, where Shia make up approximately 70%, and 40% of the population, respectively, the prospects of democratic governance alarms the Sunnis because they are the minority. As a result, democracy is viewed largely as part of a subversive Shia agenda. It's an Iranian plot. It becomes defined in this way because they want to have the support of the minority sectarian whom they are supposedly trying to support. It becomes a justification to retain their authoritarian rule. It is to sustain despotism and tyranny. That's what they are doing. The US invasion of Iraq in 2003 unleashed another sectarianism. For a couple of centuries, the Sunni minority was oppressing the Shias. Now the Shias have the power. They also need to change the discourse into sectarianism because now they want to take power and oppress the Sunnis. Back and forth. In the name of religion. This is the very sad part, isn't it? So tragic. In the name of religion, they are playing a game for power gain. Isn't it sad? We who are they claim so holy. Shame on them. Shame on them. You know Sheikh Shaltut that was mentioned by Zach? He was a brave and courageous scholar and a jurist. He said, you know what? In my opinion, the fiqh of the Shia, the Ja'fari fiqh, has equal validity as the other four Sunnis of schools of thought, and I'm going to ask Al-Azhar to begin to teach the Ja'fari fiqh. Tell me, are there any courageous scholars like this today? Or they are just power hungry? You know Ayatollah Sistani in Najaf what he said? He said, don't call our Shia brethren Ikhwanuna, our brothers. Call them Anfusana, our souls. Oh, our essence. Our integral part of our identity. Well, my question is to Ayatollah Sistani, are you prepared to say what Sheikh Shaltut said? That they should teach the Sunni fiqh and Sunni kalam and Sunni falsafa in the Shia seminaries, and they have equal validity as the Shia. That requires a lot of courage. That requires a lot of vision. That requires a lot of stamina to be able to withstand the public pressure, because they are each trying to cater to their own sectarian identity. Sheikh Shaltut was unique. May God bless his soul. He was that brave soul, and we need those kind of brave souls at the very top before it can trickle down at the level of the mass population, the foot soldiers. It has to come from the top as well. They have to provide us a vision and say, listen, we are prepared to teach Sunni usul fiqh, Sunni kalam, Sunni falsafa, Sunni irfan in Shia institutions of learning, and they have parity in terms of legitimacy in the sight of us as Shias. But that is tough to find. Last example I give you is the revolt in Syria against Bashar al-Assad. It began completely non-sectarian. They were seeking for a life of dignity. They were seeking for freedom of speech, proper human rights, employment. It was not sectarian. But they realized that the only way he can win this war is by trying to sectarianize this conflict with the involvement of Iran, amplifying the situation, the involvement of Saudi Arabia, and then we see what has happened in Syria, the massacre, the loss of innocent lives, the same loss of innocent lives that the Quran says, you take one soul and you have annihilated humanity. Isn't it phenomenal? Right? We talk about petty issues. Should we celebrate the birthday of the Holy Prophet or not? Should we say Merry Christmas? Maybe it's bid'ah. Should we say Happy Thanksgiving? Shame on us. Innocent blood in Yemen is being shed, but we seem to be completely unconcerned. This is part of a strategy. They have preoccupied our minds with petty and insignificant issues so we cannot see the larger picture. Believe me, it's a gimmick. It's a trap that they have played, and they are still engaged in this trickery, and they are still succeeding, it appears. The social media has magnified this issue multiple times. This kind of rhetoric of demonization spreads widely and so quickly through the Twitter and all of this. Phenomenal destruction is being done, and a vicious cycle begins, and lack of trust and the distrust and all this kind of myth and propaganda keeps on circulating and being pummeled into the minds of innocent people. What are a couple of issues? And my argument is that there's a lot of overlap between Sunni and Shia, but our foundation is so weak that these other exploiters are able to exploit our innocence and play the game. For example, we should discuss very honestly about what happened after the Prophet's death in Saqifa. All historians, including Sunni historians, tell us that something went wrong, in the sense there was a lot of commotion, there was disagreement, there was shouting. People were saying, I should come, and somebody was saying, this group should come, and somebody said, no, Quraysh will come, and somebody said, what about Banu Hashim? And there was a lot of infighting. Well, we have to come to terms that there was certain disagreement and commotion that happened. Sunnis have to accept that there was something that happened, and they have to accept it as part of historical record. Something happened in Karbala. They have to accept it as part of historical event that happened. We cannot, for example, neglect to mention Yazid and his role in crucifying the grandson of the Holy Prophet. It's a fact. And until they come to terms and discuss with the Shi'is will never forget this. It remains a part of the sacred narrative. The only way is to deal with the issues honestly, forthrightly, brotherly, sisterly. Likewise, the Shias have to stop this nonsense of vilifying and demonizing the companions of the Holy Prophet and the Prophet's wives. It's completely un-Quranic. It's completely un-Islamic. It is completely unprophet-like to vilify and dehumanize. The Quran says don't even insult the idols, let alone the Prophet's companions and Mu'mineen. How dare they vilify the companions on the pulpit, and we say to them, subhanallah, we like those kinds of lectures. They are using us as a pawn in the game of sectarianism. The issue of, for example, the Sunnis find the issue of self-flagellation problematic. They do this, kamezani, where there's bloodletting with a sword. In Lebanon, in parts of northern Iran. Well, the Sunnis find that polytheistic or problematic. Well, this is not an integral part of Islam or Shiism. It is just an expression of your grief. You can express your grief and sorrow for the grandson of the Prophet in other ways, doesn't have to be. And other issues, excessively revering the Imams to the point of semi-divine, they find problematic. Well, Imam Ali never said he is part of divinity or anything like that. He was a servant of God. Many issues. What I'm saying is serious issues. You will have many issues in your mind. What I'm saying is put them on the table rather than to demonize and dehumanize each other. Lastly, what is my hope? My hope is that we in the West, youngsters, I hope in you guys. For us, it's over. I don't have much hope for us. Everything is engraved already and imprinted so tightly. And we have our own assumptions that we have made, and we are not prepared to challenge the assumption. My hope is not Saudi Arabia or Iran or Iraq. My hope is right here in the West, where you have this openness that inshallah we can talk about these issues intelligently, critically, at the same time brotherly and sisterly. And this can be done when you have good intellectuals, good intelligent scholars. You need scholarships. And I don't mean Islamic studies. I mean people in different fields, political science, anthropology, psychology. All these fields are very, very important to deal with these kinds of issues that are so complex. I told you, Sunni Shia issue is a very complex issue. It's not simply a theological issue. And therefore, you need to have all this body of scholars, and that means we have to support our future scholars financially, intellectually, in whatever capacity you can. We should support them. Finally, you must have heard that this on Monday, I think they were able to land this wonderful curiosity on Mars, right? It was phenomenal. Did you see when it landed and everybody clapped and they had this, I don't know, this kind of, very fancy shaking? I like that. I've tried so many times, I just can't figure it out. It was a collective effort, not one person. If you want the Muslim community to progress, all of us have to participate. You can't expect Agha Saman to do everything, although he can. I know financially, I know his net worth, by the way. He can easily buy all of us and more. So that's not the issue. The issue is collectivity. You have this collective partnership, and only then we will be able to land our curiosity on Mars, inshallah wa ta'ala. Thank you very much for being so patient.
So before we get to honoring our Hub Foundation Scholarship recipients and our Hub Talks, we're joined by a special guest, Baraka Blue, who's a highly acclaimed rapper and poet hailing from Seattle, Washington. He's performed across North America as well as the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Europe. He's highly decorated within the global artist community for his original synthesis of spoken word poetry with the tradition of mystical poets such as Rumi and Hafez. His most recent book of poetry is entitled Reed Bed Diaspora. In addition to performances, he has taught classes and led creative writing workshops internationally. His sophomore album, Majnoon's Lost Memoirs, can be heard in cafes and concert halls across the globe. Please join me in welcoming Baraka Blue.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyid al-Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, it's a blessing and an honor to be here amongst so many beautiful brothers and sisters, teachers and elders. Thank you for having me to the Hub Foundation, Zachary, Sam, and mashallah, what a beautiful space it is you have here. It's like nothing else. I arrived and I went upstairs to check it out and I found Dawood Yassin jumping rope, alhamdulillah. So I know it's a good place then. We have an amazing night of speakers and celebrating some of our students, but I just wanted to begin with some poems. And the first poem that I'm going to begin with is a poem that is also a prayer. And I think it's worth starting with a prayer because, of course, anything worth doing is worth starting with a prayer. But the reason that I want to start with this prayer is because after every line of this prayer, your role as my co-poets is to say Ameen. And inshallah, through that, we will also sink all of our hearts in remembrance of God. And as our teachers tell us, it is hoped that Allah will answer that prayer according to the most sincere heart in the room. And of course, that's a secret with Allah. But another secret that's not so secret is it's usually not the person on stage. You guys ready for the Ameens? May your day be filled with love and light. May your wrongs be right. May your songs be tight. May your words give sight. May your nur shine bright. May you always be on the righteous side of the fight. May your lovers be loyal. May your soil be fertile. May your khakis stay creased. May your locks stay oiled. May your plans never get foiled. May your plot thicken. May your chicken be halal. May your style be sufficient. May your soul be free of its prison. May Allah increase you in your vision. May you find everything you've been missing. May you awake for prayer before the sun has risen. When you speak, may your audience listen. May you never feel trapped in the system. May you sire many righteous children who will act on prophetic tradition. May you always have food on your plate. May you learn from every mistake. May you rise above all the hate, and may Allah increase you in your state. May you never pretend that you are what you ain't. May your friends be real and never be fake. May your rent never have to be late, and may your health always be great. May Allah forgive every sin, now and forever if you falter again. And may you always stay close with your kin, and may He make all your enemies friends. May He make reality of your plans. May your present be pleasant. May you have a good end. May your heart be purified of its flaws, and may you act according to the laws that were revealed in the book of Allah, and may He catch you whenever you fall. May the One guide you to the truth. When you doubt, may He show you the proof. May you be like the Ahl Suf, with the wisdom of the elders, the energy of the youth. May He accept your prayers and your fasts, the very first all the way to the last, and remove obstacles that you have. And may you receive everything that you ask. May you never have regret for your past, and receive mercy, not the wrath. And as you travel down your personal path, may you always have a reason to laugh. Ameen. Give yourself a round of applause, mashallah. Alhamdulillah, as was mentioned by our brother Zachary, it is the month of Rabia Al-Awwal, and this is the month of the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And alhamdulillah, we get to come together and praise him, and it's the hope of every poet to be following the great tradition of praising the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that began with his Sahaba themselves. One of the great originators of this tradition is the Sahaba Ka'b ibn Zuhair. And he was actually a great poet before Islam, the son of a great poet. And in those days, as you all know, the greatest poets had their poems hung on the Kaaba itself. That was like the Billboard charts of those times. And Ka'b's father, Zuhair, was one of those who had a poem hanging. Ka'b was one of those who didn't accept the message of Islam, and the poets in those days played a role similar to media personalities of our day, that they spun a narrative and tried to influence public opinion. And so Ka'b was one of those who tried to deter people from listening to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said very unflattering things, to put it lightly. So as the Muslims got stronger in Medina, Ka'b became a bit concerned because he had said some strong words, and the Sahaba, they were warriors, they were warrior poets, and it maybe was easy for them if you insulted them to look the other way, but if you insulted the Prophet ﷺ, that's another story. Just like it'd probably be easy for most of you if someone insulted you to look the other way, but if someone said something about your mother or father, what'd you say about my mama, right? That changes everything. So of course they loved the Prophet ﷺ more than their mothers and fathers. So Ka'b started to become concerned that he might have gotten himself in some trouble. So he went to his tribe and he said, "Will you protect me? I just want to make sure we're all in this together if the Muslims come looking for me." And they said, "We don't want anything to do with that. You said that, not us," right? And in that moment, he saw that what he thought he was defending, which is the way of his people, his ancestors, that it was actually a lie, and that the Prophet ﷺ, his critique of the Arabs was actually calling them back to their true way of their ancestors, Ismail and Ibrahim. And so his heart turned toward the Prophet ﷺ, so he went to the Prophet, but he had a problem because he couldn't just go to Medina because he was a wanted man, so to speak. So he came into the gathering of the Prophet ﷺ under disguise. And he came to the Prophet and he said, "If I bring you Ka'b ibn Zuhair, will you forgive him?" And what do you think the Prophet ﷺ said? Of course. And so then he jumped up and he said, "I am Ka'b." And then the Sahaba jumped up with their swords like, "There he is." Then the Prophet ﷺ said, "Relax." Or something to that effect, of course. Paraphrasing here. And Ka'b proceeded to recite a poem that he had written for the Prophet ﷺ that begins, "Banat Su'ad." And it's a very beautiful poem that we still have to this day, and you can find it in translation as well. And at the end of that, the Prophet ﷺ took off his blessed cloak, his burda, and he enveloped Ka'b in it. He wrapped him in it, as if to say, you're safe in this world and the next. And so every poet that praises the Prophet ﷺ does so with intention to be under that cloak as well. And that's why Imam al-Busiri, the great poet, he wrote a Qasida Burda, the poem of the cloak. And there's many stories about him actually receiving the cloak after he wrote the poem. The Prophet came to him and wrapped him in the cloak. And there's many amazing stories about that, including that it healed his paralysis. And of course, praising the Prophet ﷺ can heal much more than our physical ailments. So I wanted to share that with the intention that we're all under the cloak of the Prophet ﷺ tonight as we praise him. Can you imagine one who was the gentlest of men, while being the most brave and just of all who've been? One who conquered all desires of self that make men weak, who granted all who asked him precisely what they seek, whom only jewels poured out his mouth whenever he would speak, who was the gem amongst the stones of men who shined unique. A selflessness and generosity that some would say was merely myth until they'd seen the lovers of his way, who used to mend his sandals and used to patch his clothes, who used to serve his family whenever he was home, who had a noble shyness, not gazing long upon a face, who honored all he ever met, be they king or be they slave, who always found himself at home the most amongst the poor, who never angered for himself, but only for his Lord, always just, always truthful, conscious of the one, even if it brought discomfort to himself and those he loved. A satiated stomach his whole life was rarely felt, not due to poverty, but preference of others to himself, who knew the time of day by sun and the direction by the stars, who would walk amongst his enemies without a single guard, devoid of any lower self, just humble and serene, eloquent but not verbose, just precisely what he means, whom all within his company felt light and sacred cheer, whom there was not a thing within creation that he feared, who loved to play with children and run races with his wives, who would join the festivities and honor customs of all tribes. When people yelled and lost their cool around him, he was calm, who asked forgiveness for his enemies, even as they did him wrong, who kept a goat he'd milk himself for people in his house, whose wives, when asked about him, said he was the perfect spouse, who never looked down on a pauper or flattered once a prince, but called every soul unto the one without even a flinch. Every single gorgeous trait of character he had, of noble lineage, yet he was the orphan of his clan, one imbued with wisdom and piercing inner sight, yet he was the unlettered one who would neither read nor write. All knowledge and trait of character unflawed were placed inside his very being directly by Allah. The way to salvation and triumph after death, to detachment and joy in life with each and every breath, to walk the righteous path and never falter come what may, and may Allah give us success in following his way. They call him El-Amin, the trustworthy, the honest, and we call him beloved, our master, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Thank you. Alhamdulillah. That poem is a summary of chapter 20 of Imam Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin, in which he, in 40 books, tries to cover all aspects of human life. The first quarter is about acts of worship. The second quarter is about what we might call mundane matters, including, having a job, having a family, friendship. All these things he shows should be means for us to draw near to Allah if we approach them correctly. And then the second half is about the vices and virtues of the heart and how to transform them. But right in the center, the 20th book, he puts the book about the character of the Prophet ﷺ, very intentionally to say this is what holds this all together, because we are human beings. We need a physical embodiment of it, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. So we're discussing unity within the Ummah. And this is a great honor to speak on this topic, because it's very clear we're not all going to agree on everything. Even what is the best color, what is the best food here at the buffet, we're probably going to disagree, so much less matters of ultimate consequence. But in these days and in these times, to unite on good and what we do hold common is of utmost importance. And inshallah, we can all be transformed by the model of our blessed Prophet ﷺ and be more Muhammadan, inshallah. We know that one of the goals of our deen is to clothe ourselves in the names of God. Allah is Ar-Rahman, is merciful, and we want to become merciful. Allah is just, Al-Adl, and we want to, even just a drop within that ocean of justice, take it on and more perfectly reflect it within the mirror of our hearts. And so on and so forth. Allah is Al-Latif, the gentle, we want to be gentle, etc. Within the 99 names, the last one that's usually listed is As-Sabur, the patient. And some of the scholars say that one is the hardest to take on. That quality is the hardest to attain. So these are times, and perhaps every time, in which we need a lot of patience. And you're very patient to listen through these poems. So I want to recite a poem about patience, called A Station Called Patience. It's new, so let's see if I remember it, inshallah. There was a station called Patience that few had attained. Most got off before that stop and only knew it in name. Those who basked in the sun but didn't care for the rain were perplexed at those few who remained on the train. Paid them no mind and were blind to the secrets they knew, like the brightest colors hide in the deepest of blues. For opposite the direction most people pursue, there is a station called Patience, only known by a few. It may not have the bright lights or the games that amuse, but its beauty exceeds everything that they knew. The other stations always look shiny and new, but this station looks simple and hidden from view. Those who found patience seem to find it by chance. Perhaps they fell asleep on the train and woke up in its trance. Maybe a dream they had seen where the question was asked, is there more to this place than appears at first glance? Some were forced there when the cost of living was high, or the struggles and troubles had chased them inside. But those who entered her tavern and drank from her wine found the place they called Patience was a station divine. For what looked to be ruins to the ones that passed by, as they scoffed or they pitied those living inside, Patience people looked back and they pitied their pride, which veiled them from what only patience could reveal or could hide. Patience is a trust the other stations refused. It infuses and transforms mortal vision anew. Patience is not merely waiting, though they're often confused. Patience is a station you awaken into. Once you find the one for whom patience is due, you'll see a mysterious relation between patience and you. like a long-lost memory that finally came into view, you'll see that patience has been patiently waiting for you. Thank you. So I'm just going to close with a short poem, inshallah. And it's inspired by two women who inspire me a great deal. The first is the great saint of our tradition, Rabia Al-Adawiya. And there's many stories about Rabia, but she was known to be someone of great interiority and contemplation, that she would spend time, so much time in seclusion, that people would try to get her outside, like, Rabia, come outside, it's a beautiful day. And she used to respond, there's nothing in the world that's not already here with me. And she had such a love and a profound relationship with God that she made this famous dua, "Oh Allah, if I worship you for desire for your paradise, then close its gates to me. And if I worship you for fear of your hellfire, then throw me in it. But if I worship you for you alone, then unveil yourself to me." And this is her state with God. And one of the great English language poets that inspires me is Emily Dickinson. And she reminds me of Rabia in a lot of ways because she was also someone who loved seclusion and loved silence and loved to be alone in her room. And she wrote profound poems to God and about God. And she was, many people, and there's probably some in this room, they're closet poets, right? They like poetry, but they don't want to tell anybody. They would be too shy to share, right? And she was the literal closet poet because when she died, the people in her own house didn't know she was a poet. And they found thousands and thousands of poems in her closet. And they realized not only was she a poet, but she was arguably the greatest poet in the English language of her age. And I bring that up because I'm going to recite a poem for them. And I just wanted to remark that we live in a time of such externality and everybody's look at me. And I think in our time, quietude and contemplation and interiority and a firm, profound ability to be silent and be with oneself and be with one's creator is what we really need. And far from it being something about just hiding, the monk hiding in the mountain, right? It's not about that. It's about having the ability to be present in the world, to take time for retreat such that we can act in the world as the example of our blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam shows so eloquently. So this is a short poem called She Wrote Poems in Secret. She wrote poems in secret. She wrote secrets in her poems and said she only felt communion when sitting silent all alone. She appeared odd and quiet, but was polite just the same. She wore the clothes of the simple, and her room was small and plain. But within it was a window that looked out upon the sea, the firmament beyond it, and the fire underneath. Those who ventured in her chamber said no such window they could find. She'd just look at them with sadness and say, this window's in the mind. They'd say, come outside, it's springtime. There's a world out here to see. She'd say, there's nothing in the cosmos that's not already here with me. They'd say, she's gone agoraphobic. By depression she's been had. Anxiety has gripped her, or a fever's made her mad. But the poems that she wrote were of sweet September rain, love's enduring flowers, gardens green that never fade, how truth itself and beauty become one beneath the grave, and really always have been, though a tongue can scarce explain. She wrote poems in secret. She wrote secrets in her poems. and though no one could match her, she died humble and unknown. Thank you very much. Alhamdulillah.
To our scholarship recipients, I'd like to briefly add to all of you, please join us if you're able to contribute to the Hub Foundation Scholarship Fund. There's envelopes in the brochures, and in the back there's a place where you can leave donations if you feel so inclined. I'd also like to thank again my friend and colleague, our founder, Sam. There's a saying of the Prophet, the one who hasn't thanked creation, hasn't thanked his fellow human beings, hasn't thanked God. And so, and a secret about this, connected to what might be called the metaphysics of gratitude, we actually thank God through thanking people. So thank you, Sam, and thank you, all of you, for joining us and supporting our scholars, who I'm thrilled to be able to introduce. This is a very talented group that we are honored to be able to support their research. Beginning with someone who I think exemplifies this connection that we're speaking about tonight, improving Sunni-Shia relations, looking at the sources very carefully. Miss Sara Aziz is a master's student in Islamic Studies at the University of Chicago Divinity School. Please join me in congratulating Sara Aziz. And each of our scholarship recipients are going to speak for about a minute this evening about their research and their plans. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you to Hub Foundation and Mr. Herbert. I'm just going to briefly tell you a little bit about my research and my work. So I'm a second-year master's student at the University of Chicago, currently applying to PhD programs, so hopefully that's the next step. I basically try to connect the theoretical genres within the tradition in Persian, using primarily Persian and Arabic literature, to the more to aspects of Muslim daily practice. So, for instance, I focused a lot on Ibn Arabi, which tends to be more metaphysics, very theoretical mysticism, and tried to read more kind of common texts in the light of the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi. So, just to give an example, previously I had read Muslim travelogues and read dream narratives within these travelogues in light of Ibn Arabi's discussion of the imagination. And sorry, I'm a bit like shaking. So, for instance, I was reading. Oh, it's okay. Yeah, it's really such an honor to be here. But for instance, I'll just tell you like how it goes. So, to kind of demystify the academic, because we tend to be secluded in the library, with just the books. So it's good to like talk to people about what we do. It's a very different experience, and it's actually like why I do. So just reading, I'll give you an example. I was reading 3 Muslim travelogues. Ibn Battuta, probably everybody heard about him. Nasser Khusro and Evliya Shalabi, Ottoman, a Persian, and an Arab. Each writing in their own language, different time periods, and I see like, oh wow, each one of them had a dream, and that's very strange. And each travel story starts with a dream, and I'm like, that's very strange. Western scholars, when they were looking at each of these books, like travel narratives, they just say, oh, it's a nice way to start a journey. Let me tell you, I had a dream and I saw the Prophet, or I had a dream and someone came and told me go to Hajj or something. And so I was thinking, is there a way to read this without just saying this is a literary device and it's a nice way to start a book? And so I was like, turns out Ibn Arabi has a whole metaphysics of the imagination, a way to understand dreams, and other people talk about it as well. It's not just Ibn Arabi. So that's kind of just trying to connect 2 different genres that usually don't talk to each other. And same thing, my current more current project is on looking at dua, so prayer, supplication literature, and trying to read, for instance, texts like, specifically I'm interested in the Sahifa, which tends to find itself more in Shiite circles, Sahifa Sajjadiyya of the 4th Imam, and the great-grandson of the Prophet. So trying to read that and looking into what does dua mean, why do we have this mode of prayer, why is it so intimate? And people do talk about it. Ibn Sina talks about it, Ibn Arabi talks about it, Mullah Sadra. So again, engaging these two different genres, hopefully in a way that could affect how people outside of, not within academia and outside of academia, understand these texts, because it's a really, really rich heritage. And I think we need to bring these narratives together and include them as part of our life and get to know them. This scholarship is helping me do that, and your presence here is really encouraging. So thank you again all, really appreciate it.
Now I'd like to introduce another very talented student, graduate student at the University of Chicago Divinity School. He's a PhD student in Islamic Studies. Please join me in congratulating and welcoming Edith Coburn.
My name is Edith Coburn. I am a PhD student at the University of Chicago Divinity School. My research is centered on the study of intellectual history of Islam in the medieval age with a special interest in Ibn Arabi's mystical ideas. My general aim is to understand the linguistic, cultural, and religious setting that led to formation of Ibn Arabi's thought, contextualizing his ideas within the broader context of medieval Islamic thought and Greek philosophy. I'm going to share very briefly one of my reflections relating it with the question of how to assess this prize. My name is Nada. In Spanish, nada means nothing. Etymologically speaking, the Spanish nada is derived from the Latin nata, that which is born. This being the case, the term, to some extent, designates from the start not a sheer non-existence, but sort of non-existence having some positive value. I have a very short, funny story of how I found a way to this positive meaning in my ontological experience. One day I asked my soul, "Who are you?" She replied, "I am nothing." Expressing my discontent with her answer, I repeated, "Man anti, who are you?" She replied, reminding me of the Quranic verse, هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا, meaning, doesn't man remember a time when he was nothing, not even mentioned? Not only am I not a thing which has a substantial existence, but also I am not even mentioned in words to the extent that I don't even possess a quality of being talked about. I requested further clarification from her, saying, "That is not enough. Tell me more about your essential nature." Intensifying and emphasizing further the non-existential dimension of the notion of non-being, he spoke in Persian, "Man hiç ender hiçem," meaning I am nothing but nothing. Immediately afterwards, Al-Sheikh Al-Akbar Ibn Arabi appeared to us in the mention of imagination, interrupting the heated conversation between me and my soul. Then he referred her to first sentence of his work, Al-Futuhat Al-Makkiyya, Meccan Revelation, recommending my soul rather to adhere to phrase, Adam al-Adam, the non-existence of non-existence, which seems at first sight hard to understand. Just like nada in Spanish and rien in French, the derivative of non-existence, Ibn Arabi's mystical philosophy, indicates a positive quality of reality. I am not here to explain how this notion has been discussed in his works, but my soul happily took the Sheikh's suggestion very well. I was also satisfied with that. Yes, I am submerged in the ocean of non-existence. Looking into myself, I see nothing, but that I am surrounded by nothing. This is a long story, and it doesn't deserve mention here, but I would like to confess that this is exactly what I felt when I heard from Mr. Marquith that I was awarded this scholarship. I have two selves, each having its own value. One of them, looking inside me, given in the deepest part of my soul, is filled with non-existence, with carnal indulgences, weakness, poverty, lust, and selfishness. The other, capable of being to some extent absorbed by you, was given some value based on the documents that I have provided. I still don't know how the second part of myself, having some value in your eyes, was originated from the first part of myself, full of absence. I think the only possible answer I have found is that this is your goodwill. This is your husn zan. And I remember the Quranic verse, ما أصابك من حسنة فمن الله وما أصابك من سيئة فمن نفسك. Whatever good happens to you is from God. Whatever evils happens to you is from yourself. I would like to thank first and foremost the founder of Hub Foundation, Mr. Sam Herbert, and then the executive director, Mr. Zachary Marquith, and research and policy associate, Mr. Sarah Mustafawi, and the scholarship advisory board, Dr. Craig Considine, Dr. Hamid Mavani, Dr. John Andrew Morrow, Dr. Cyrus Elizargar, and everyone at Hub Foundation for making this scholarship possible. Receiving this scholarship will help reduce my financial burdens and will allow me to concentrate more of my time for studying. Your generosity has inspired me to provide assistance for others and give back to this community by enabling future students to achieve their goals just as you have helped me. By the way, I would like to express my grief, my deep grief and sorrow for children who are killed all over the world, but specifically in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. Once again, thank you so very much for generosity.
Our next recipient, or Hub Scholar, I'm pleased to introduce a graduate of Zaytuna College and now a master's student at the Graduate Theological Union who studies a topic that's also very dear to the foundation, comparative religious studies, and in his case, Islam and Hinduism. Please join me in congratulating Imran Ghani.
Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Thank you very much. Beginning by thanking Allah, sending prayers of peace upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah once said that if I had to think about paying for an onion while I was a student, I would not have been able to study. Thank you so much, Mr. Hirbad and the leadership community in the Hub Foundation for reviving this tradition that was in every great Muslim empire of sponsoring students of Islamic knowledge. Those great empires of the past understood that students of the religion needed to be empowered, needed to be, because they had an incredible responsibility and duty of preserving our knowledge, our ways of knowing, and what it is that distinguishes our great civilization, our great religion. Thank you very much for understanding that and for reviving this tradition. May Allah bless this organization, bless the families that support this organization, and inshallah continue to provide awesome scholarships for us for us PhDs. Let all the MDs, the money doctors, support the PhDs, the poor, hungry doctors. As Zach mentioned, I was trained at Zaytuna College in Arabic, theology, and law. May Allah raise my teachers in rank in this world and in the hereafter. I am now at GTU training in historiography, and my research interests focus on the interface between Muslims and Hindus. In my undergraduate studies, I wrote a paper on what happened in 1947 when the partition happened. Why did Imran Ghani, end up here in the United States? I look Bengali, I speak Urdu. My father was born in Dhaka. His father was born in Calcutta. My grandfather was born on my mother's side in Delhi. She was born in Karachi. What happened there? And everyone says it's because of this inherent tension between Muslims and Hindus. And so that paper sparked my interest, and really that's when I realized that this is what I would like to spend the rest of my life pursuing and answering this question. And I've come to see the incredible history that Muslims and Hindus share, and the tragedy that was the 1947 partition, and what has ensued into the greater divisions that we see today. And so I hope to, in addition to Arabic, learn Sanskrit and look at the incredible tradition of scholarship in both of these traditions and the incredible indebtedness that each other has to one another. Thank you very much.
I'm now pleased to introduce the person who I think traveled the farthest to be with us, Miss Adiba Hassan from the University of Toronto. Adiba is focusing on political science.
Thank you so much for everyone. Sorry, let me restart. Thank you so much, everyone, to be here, and also the distinguished speakers today. I think you all spoke to my heart about how much not only this scholarship has provided me, but also enabled me to do a lot of the things. For meeting so many amazing scholars right now coming up with me and doing so much good change in the world today. I'd like to specifically thank Dr. Zagar, who did introduce me to this scholarship, and also to the Hub Foundation. We are going to be talking about our future, but sorry, I'm a little nervous as well. So let me start with what happened during the undergrad. Was that my research was focused on political Islam and what it meant for us to be theorizing Islam in a political atmosphere like the United States today. Being a Muslim and being in the United States and an international student, I didn't know where I fit in. That's what sort of drove me to pursue a master's in global affairs, to bring up a Muslim voice in what seems to me a very Western-heavy, focused discipline. With this, right now I'm focusing on, my research is focusing on the Rohingya Muslims and the atrocities that they have been facing, and how can we incorporate their voices within other ethnic identities in South Asia. With that, thank you so much once again, and thank you again for being here.
I'm now pleased to introduce another student in comparative religious studies who is a graduate of Bayon Claremont and now a PhD student at Claremont School of Theology, Mr. Logan David Seiler.
So I won't say too much, but when Zach said we were going to be saying a few words, he asked to highlight, how the Hub Foundation has, been a great assistance to us in the pursuit of our studies. And so I wanted to just start by saying that the contribution that the Hub Foundation is making to the Muslim American community and to the ongoing creation of authentic Muslim American heritage cannot be overstated, really. As a community, we need scholarship, and through scholarship, the affirmation of the relevance of our tradition. About my background, I graduated from Bayan Claremont in the spring. My focus for my thesis was on basically traditional Islamic metaphysics, particularly the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi, and compared to more modern, non-reductive materialist scientific claims. I was looking at the soul, basically, and modern non-reductive materialist arguments against the existence of an immaterial soul, and then looking at Ibn Arabi's formulation of the soul and seeing where that, where perhaps the modern materialist claims fall short. And I've just begun a PhD in comparative theology and philosophy at Claremont School of Theology, and I will most likely be focusing on I'll continue looking at some of the modern philosophies and Islamic philosophies, the Islamic tradition. I will also probably be looking more at Islamic mysticism, particularly the Sufi path, and some of the correlation and underlying universal principles shared with the Eastern traditions. And I'm interested in looking at personal development in the traditions, and also human potential views of human potential by looking at comparative hagiography, basically. And anyways, I wanted to say that I chose this PhD in comparative theology and philosophy because I'm deeply committed to advocating for the relevance in today's world, not just of Islam, but of religion altogether, Islam with a capital R sometimes, as they put it. And while I love the study of religion, it does not come without doubts. There are definitely, when you're pursuing a PhD in religion, there are definitely some days where it could seem like the most impractical life path that I could have chosen, or anyone could have chosen. And yet, the Hub Foundations and groups like the Hub Foundation, it provides, and for myself, and I'm sure for the other scholars, other scholarship recipients, a voice of reassuring affirmation. There's literally someone here telling you, yes, we value the path you have chosen, and we value you not only morally, but we will also help support you in that endeavor. And it's voices like that that will ensure that people will continue to choose this path as an endeavor. And so I urge you, if you want to add to that voice of affirmation, to support those who take on this endeavor and to ensure that more do it in the future, then I urge you to join with the Hub Foundation in their mission and to ensure that they can continue this. So thank you very much.
Before I introduce our last two recipients, I'd like to remind everyone that we do have a raffle for a free trip to Malaysia and Singapore. So please, if you haven't added your name, do so. There's a great chance that you might be a recipient. I think there's less than 50 tickets in there. And the box is right outside the door. So thank you. So our next recipient, Samuel Bendek Sotios. He's already an accomplished scholar in the field of psychology. I would commend his books to everyone here. He's pursuing his doctorate in psychology at California Southern University, Please join me in congratulating Samuel Bendek Sotios.
So good evening and greetings. It's a real honor to be here, and I want to express my deep gratitude and appreciation to the Hub Foundation, Sam Hirbad, the founder, Zachary Markwith, the executive director, and all of the other Hub staff, Hub Foundation staff, and other individuals that helped put this event on. It's, again, a real honor to be here. So while my interests are wide-ranging, I'll speak about two aspects of my research, writing, and academic interests right now at the moment. One area is looking at modern psychology as a whole and where it interfaces with the world of religion, the world's religions. So that's looking at an in-depth analysis of psychology, what they call the four main paradigms of psychology, and trying to make sense of things on the ground. I work directly with people. That's my day-to-day work, with families also, and do groups as well in mental health. So with that said, where does the world of mental health psychology meet and differ from the world religions? And then the other aspect is to present or articulate how each of the world religions has a corresponding psychology or science of the soul that is not dependent or reliant on modern Western psychology or modern Western science. So in its sense, you could say it's decolonizing the science, or this decolonizing psychology, the science of the soul, so that believers, practitioners, those interested in the subject can look at psychology as it's known throughout the traditions on its own level and not having to be in this predicament where the hegemonic influence of modern Western psychology has the monopoly on truth when it comes to science and psychology. So those are two areas of my interest right now, and again, I could not continue my academic studies to complete a doctorate in psychology if it wasn't for the Hub Foundation. So I'm extremely grateful and appreciative. Thank you all for coming tonight, and hope you enjoy the evening. Thank you so much.